Good morning and welcome to this week's Grow, where we gather to recharge, organize, and work here as members of MWEG. We're so glad that you're joining us today. We have Jessica Larson with us, who is going to give us a Protecting Democracy update, share a little bit about what that area of advocacy group here at MWEG is working on, and some ways that we can get involved and work together. I am going to have Jessica introduce herself. She's a little bit new to MWEG, and so she can tell us a little bit about herself and what she's doing with her group and her volunteers that are working with her, and then we will hear about the updates. Jessica, why don't you introduce yourself since you're new?
Sure. Hi, everybody. It's nice to meet you. As Rachel said, I'm Jessica Larson. I've been a member of MWEG since really almost the beginning, and just started working with them a couple months ago to help with some of their Protecting Democracy initiatives. It's been really great thus far, and getting to know some of the members and getting to see what you guys have done in the past. It's been really inspirational. And one of the reasons I came on was because protecting democracy is really important to me. I think it's important to all of us, but in my mind, it is really fundamental to everything that we're trying to do, kind of the linchpin that holds everything, all the other areas to kind of together, because if our democracy isn't working well, then nothing is really working well. And so that's kind of the type of issues we're working on right now. I've been able to come in on some pretty great shoulders. It's a lot to live up to. But we've kind of just taken the torch from there. And there's a couple things that we're interested in. We're kind of forming a long-term strategy around these issues to hopefully get us through the 2024 election. And one of those that we're working on is electoral reform. And MWEG has spent a lot of time on these issues with the Electoral Count Reform Act, voter education, all kinds of things that have come up. And one of the things that we're going to work on right now that we're working with other outside organizations and learning about are kind of some structural reforms about how we actually vote. And so that's kind of where I'm going to start today. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time kind of explaining what the challenges are, and then talk about some really promising reforms that are happening at the state level. And most of what we're doing right now is at the state level, and we're learning about a lot of them from our members. So if something comes up that you feel really passionate about or interested in, I hope that you'll reach out to me or other members of our team so that we can possibly try to help support you. Just 1 second here, I need to pull something down. Okay. So the first thing I want to talk about is really what we call, can we have the next slide, Rachel, the doom loop of toxic politics. And it sounds awful because it kind of is awful. But I think it's important to understand the history, and if we want to be able to understand how we got here and how we can possibly help fix it. I think we can all pretty much agree that our systems aren't working the way that we hope they work. They're broken in a lot of ways. And can we have the next slide, Rachel? So I'll just start. So I'm going to start. So in the early 1900s, up until about 1960, there were really 4 parties. We say there are 2 parties, but there were really 4 parties. There was the Republicans and the conservative and liberal Republicans, and there were the conservative and liberal Democrats. And they had a lot of broad ideological overlap. If you think about kind of just a group of people, there were, red and blue, interspersed all throughout the country, in cities, in rural. And because of that, there was a lot of opportunity to form coalitions and to compromise. And but as and social and cultural issues were kind of ignored during this period, and we were kind of able to get a lot of stuff done. But starting about 1960, things started to realign, and with the civil rights movement, women's movements, a lot of upheaval, and we started breaking up. Really started kind of breaking up, and we had the really became more of a true two-party system. And there wasn't a lot of overlap between the parties, and people started drawing really hard lines. And those hard lines have gotten harder and harder and harder over the years. We just can't seem to disagree. If we do disagree, you know, the other side, they're immoral, they're un-American. If we try to compromise, people are considered betraying their party. And the parties are heating up, right? The stakes are getting higher and higher. We're fighting harder and harder because the stakes are so high, right? You know, it's almost like the soul of our country is at stake, and you're hearing this rhetoric from both sides. And that's tough, but when that becomes really dangerous is when we become so afraid of the other side that we start, our shared rules, our democratic norms become less important to us. And we start to think that the ends justify the means. And by we, I'm talking about our elected leaders. We start to think that whatever we do is okay because, and I can overlook these things, these social norms, these democratic norms, because what I'm fighting for is so important. And when that happens, we really risk the legitimacy of our institutions that get called into question. And that's kind of where we are right now. And so I guess what we're working on and at MWEG with Protecting Democracy is how can we help to overcome some of these issues. And what we really feel that we need are some structural changes to how we vote, that we feel like we need more competition within the parties and between the parties. And we need more voices at the table, more candidates running for office, more voter turnout. And how do we get there? So can we go to the next slide? So I'm going to talk about what has been called the primary problem. Our representatives really no longer represent the majority of us. In the last couple elections, about 10% of all eligible voters effectively determined the winner of more than 80 congressional seats. And this is because most congressional districts are safe for one party or the other, making the election, the primary election, the election that matters the most. If you can see from here in the last election, 359 of the 435 House seats were decided in primaries that were safe seats. And of those 359, 151 were decided in an unopposed primary. And that represents about 82 million people in our country. And these are not partisan issues. These are cross-partisan issues, cross-country issues. So of those safe seats, about 38% were Democrats and 45% were Republicans. And those numbers stay pretty close. And there are also 11 million independent and unaffiliated voters that were not allowed to participate in primaries. I'm going to talk about that in a few more minutes. Then there are a lot of reasons for this. One is gerrymandering. One is self-selecting gerrymandering. But this is just kind of the situation that we're in now. Primary elections generally have very low turnout, and those that do come are usually from the ideological wings of the party because they feel, you know, they're very involved, and so they like to show up to vote, which means that the incumbents are increasingly out of step from their constituencies as a whole because they're only getting, their base is this few people that are showing up for the primaries. And the only threat that most politicians face is to be primary. This may be a term that you've heard by someone, and it's usually someone to the ideological extreme. So in the last election, every incumbent who lost his or her primary was beat by somebody who was more to the extreme of their views. So that really incentivizes those people running for office and those people who are already in office to adapt their behavior to please the few, which again is mostly comprised of the ideological wings. So it's essentially, in many ways, like a permanent minority rule. So this is the loop, right? We're in the loop of our electoral system. So a loop, you know, is like what happens is you have a doom loop is something negative happens that causes something else negative happens and often worsens the first negative thing that happens, and it's just going on and on, right? So we're in this loop right now where it's difficult for us to elect representatives who represent the majority or their legislatures or Congress, and then they go and they make laws that help them retain power and further weaken and diminish our ability to participate and be represented. And so this is an issue that we're really concerned with, right? We want everybody, one of MWEG's pegs is principles of ethical government is to maximize participation, let people participate in the process that's so important to the function of our government. So I want to talk about some possible solutions. And hopefully everybody is not feeling like we actually are in doom, because there's a lot of really great solutions, really exciting solutions out there right now. And before I get into this, I just want to stress that like no system is perfect. There's no one way to approach any of these challenges. At MWEG, we're somewhat agnostic towards these reforms. We're supportive of all kinds of electoral reforms that fit within our principles, that are ethical, that are nonpartisan, that will strengthen our democratic system. So when we are faced with new legislation or organizations come to talk to us, to work with us on certain initiatives, we always measure everything that we're doing against these principles. So also, most of this stuff is happening at the state level. And because of that is another reason I feel that we're a little less agnostic, because every population is really different, and what's going to work in one place doesn't necessarily always going to be the best solution to another place. Okay, so getting into our primaries, I want to start out by saying that most of us know the Constitution says that the state legislatures are supposed to determine the time, place, and manner for holding all state and federal elections. And many states have ceded the power in determining how elections are run to the major parties. And I want to point out that the parties are mentioned nowhere in the Constitution. And I'm not anti-party at all, but the parties have amassed a tremendous amount of power and power over our legislatures. And the other interesting fact is, while many of the parties generally, determine the way the states have ceded the power, so the parties are helping to determine how the elections are run, the administration of the elections are actually paid for by the public. So you kind of have this partnership, right? So the public's paying for it, but the parties are determining who can participate. So two possible solutions, and that are picking up a lot of steam right now, and that are really interesting and really promising, are open primaries and voting innovations. And I'm going to talk a little bit first about open primaries. And I want to describe how primaries work across the country, because they work differently in different places. Can we have the next slide? So if you look at this map here, I'm just kind of going to go over a couple of the things so you can understand what we're kind of trying to, what we're working on. So if you look at the blue states, there are 15 blue states that are closed primaries. And that means that only voters that are registered with the party can vote in that party's primary. So if you are an unaffiliated or an unenrolled voter or an independent voter, you cannot participate in the primary. So we feel that this is a somewhat of a form of voter oppression, right? Like, especially since the states are paying for it, since we're paying for it, we feel that no one should be required to join a political party to exercise their right to vote. We feel like all qualified voters should be able to participate in elections equally. If you look at the map, there are a couple that have some lines in them. Those 4 states, the way it works in those 4 states is the states have said the parties can run the elections, and the Democratic Party in those states has said to the independent voters, if you want to participate in our primary, you can participate in the Democratic primary. So they're closed primaries, but there's this little caveat if you want to participate that way. One of the issues people have with, actually, let me just go back and talk a little bit first about open primaries. So open primaries, open nonpartisan primaries, here's how they work. And those are primarily the states that have the, that are the light colored. states. Can we go back to that other slide? And there are 20 of those states. And that means voters of any registration or no registration can vote. You just go, you vote, you pick a ballot, you vote. One of the issues you've probably heard about this is people worry about crossover voting. That's an issue that comes up, but I haven't seen a ton of reasons why that would prevent this kind of voting. Primarily because a lot of times people cross over in their vote. Not everybody votes the party line every time. The next kind of party registration is what's called open primary with partisan registration, or semi-closed, sometimes semi-open. And that means unaffiliated or independent voters can vote in a major party ballot. But if you're already registered, you can only vote on that party's ballot. And there are 10 states that do it this way. And then these are the really exciting ones. The top 2 nonpartisan open primary and the top 4 open primary. So there are 2 states that do top 2 nonpartisan open primaries for congressional elections. And then Nebraska does it for state legislatures. And what this means is there is no party primary. There's one primary. It's run by the state. All of the candidates are listed on the ballot for everything. So sometimes it lists their party, sometimes it doesn't list their party. And voters vote for any person they want. And then the top 2, whoever gets the top 2 most votes goes to the general election. And then there's the top 4 open primary. And this has started this last election in Alaska. And there are several states that have this on their ballots coming up in 2024 and are working towards it right now. And this is similar to top 2, but uses top 4. So there's one primary with everybody on it. And then the top 4 go to the general election. And then just really quick, Louisiana has never had a primary for like 50 years. They just do everybody on the election day on the same ballot. And then if nobody gets more than 50% of the vote, they have a runoff. So some of the reasons, can we go to the next slide, that we support open primaries is that we feel it's really fair to the millions of independent voters. And independent voters are the fastest growing segment of the population, which really probably isn't surprising to a lot of people. They don't feel aligned with one or the other parties. And then when you put the public funding issue in there, you just feel that it's more fair, more ethical to involve everybody. They find in places that have open primaries that they feel like there's a lot more voter choice, a lot more candidate competition. And because of that, citizens are incentivized to vote. Localities that have open or nonpartisan registration have significantly higher turnout. And then lastly, this is really important, they find that when there's open primaries, there's more choice, more competition, that leads to less polarization. And part of that is because the officials are incentivized to listen and to appeal to their entire constituencies and not just partisan voters. If everybody is voting rather than this 10% that have voted them into office, they are listening, they're compromising, and things seem to be working a lot better. So then I'll move on to the next kind of thing, that different types of voting innovation. And the one that I'm going to focus on today, I listed a few previously: approval voting, multi-member proportional, multi-member districts with proportional voting. But the one that seems to have the most momentum behind it right now, and that's been tested the most, that has worked, is called ranked choice voting or instant runoff voting. And you may have heard of this before. And it's funny. It started out as a very nonpartisan type of initiative, and then in the last couple of years, it's become a very partisan issue, and which is one of the reasons they're calling it instant runoff voting now. It's more descriptive of the process, but also a little bit of rebranding. So the way that instant runoff voting works is that you rank the candidates in order of preference. So the ballots are all counted. So let's say you have, 4 people, you would rank who you like the best. The ballots are initially counted to establish the number of votes for each candidate. If any candidate has more than half of the first choice votes, then that candidate wins, it's over. If not, then the candidate with the fewest votes is eliminated, and the voters who selected that candidate as their first choice have their votes added to the total of the candidate who was their next choice. And then this process continues until one candidate has more than half the votes, and then that person is the winner. This has been working in a lot of different localities, a lot of municipalities. They did it in Maine. They did it in Alaska with open primaries this last election. And people seem to really like it. If you think about, how you vote, I'm just thinking for myself, there's always, if there's several candidates, let's say there's 4 or 5, oftentimes there's one I really like, and there's a couple that they're okay, and then there's a couple that I just do not like. And so one of the benefits that people feel that ranked choice voting has is it really can more fully express people can more fully express their will, rather than, this black and white, Republican or Democrat. There's a little more nuance there in the voting. Voters feel that it helps increase competition because there's no spoilers. So, spoilers when you have this third party coming in, so you have 3 people, and maybe you really like the third party, maybe the third party stands for everything you stand for, but you have to do an equation in your head. Well, if I vote for him, I'm probably taking a vote away from, this woman or whoever they're running against. And so you're not always able to really vote for who you want to. And this ranked choice voting really eliminates that. It encourages civility in campaigning and really helps with peacemaking. I listened to some county clerks and mayors in Utah who are participating in the ranked choice pilot program out there. And they all said that the campaigns were so much different than their previous campaigns because they were trying to get the other votes, right? You don't want to be trashing the person that you're running against. And so it really led to much more civil campaigning, much more kind of collaboration and overlap. I said it was much more issue oriented rather than kind of like cultural, social issues, tangents that people can get off on to distract. It has the winner of these elections has the majority support of the people, right? So most of the people who they're representing, who most of the people felt was an okay person, rather than just somebody who is only getting a really small portion of the overall vote. And in places where they would have an instant runoff race, it saved a lot of money because they didn't have to have the instant runoff race. So these are some of the things that we've been working on. We feel it, kind of intersects both of our missions of peacemaking and then also of protecting democracy. And so I guess the question that we're asking ourselves now is, so what do we do with this? Can we get to the next slide? So I guess a question I'll ask you is like, what is really happening in your state right now? This last election legislative cycle for a lot of states has saw a lot of legislation trying to prohibit open primaries and ranked choice voting. I mean, a ton. I would not doubt if it was almost every state had something like that in it. And part of that has to do with the election that happened in Alaska, and which was the first state that did a congressional ranked choice vote. And I'll explain to you really quickly what happened there so you can think about this as you're analyzing the issues yourself. So in Alaska, they had an open primary that was a top 4. So the top 4 finishers went to the general election. And one of the parties, one of the top 4, he dropped out. So there were 3 parties left, and 2 of them were Republicans, a guy named Begich and then Sarah Palin. And then the third person was a Democrat named Mary Peltola. And after the first the first ranking of the votes, Begich had like 30%, and Sarah Palin had like 34%, and Peltola had about 40%. And then when they re-ranked, and so what happens is Begich is out, and so all of his votes, whoever they had second place, went to those candidates. And of his second place candidates, about a third went to Mary Peltola, and about 2/3 went to Sarah Palin. And because of that, Mary Peltola actually wound up winning the race. She had more votes. And this really frustrated a lot of people, because they said, well, this isn't right. This election isn't right, because we're majority conservative Republicans. And so Republicans should have won. And ranked choice voting made it so a Republican didn't win. But the reality is, ranked choice voting worked exactly how it was supposed to work. That was a really, really, really nasty election between Sarah Palin and Begich. They told their constituencies, hey, don't rank, don't vote, don't, whatever you do, don't put, whoever it was, Sarah Palin or Begich, don't put them down as your second, only put me down as first. And it really, they really kind of did themselves in. And a lot of people feel, hey, this is how it's supposed to work, right? Just the fact that a third of these Republicans went for this Democrat shows us that the reasons that we vote are really nuanced and really different. And they're not always ideological. And so that's kind of how ranked choice voting works. It doesn't always, it's not always supposed to change who wins the race, right? Like Peltola would have won that race if they had just done plurality. She had the most votes when they finished the first round. But it's supposed to change what the winners, the candidates, are incentivized to do. So the message is like, you go to Congress and do your job, or else you're going to lose your job. Work across the aisle, be a peacemaker, compromise. Let's come to real solutions. Let's talk to each other. Let's have some healthy conversations and competitions as we are legislating and kind of doing things. And so that's kind of, with that is kind of an overlay. A lot of states are really getting into ranked choice voting. They think it's really great. So here are some of the things that we're kind of working on right now at a state level with ranked choice voting. In Arizona right now, they have a couple of organizations are trying to get a ballot initiative that will allow for ranked choice voting within the state. And on May 11th, we're going to have a representative of voter choice come and talk to the chapter there via Zoom, and it'll be on Facebook Live to kind of really go in more depth and explain how ranked choice voting works there. And also they'll also have an initiative for open ballots. In Nebraska, we're going to be having a joint event with one of our partners, Veterans for Political Innovation, and we really love these guys. Oftentimes, the men in our lives are interested in participating in MWEG, and we're a women's organization generally. And so we're kind of going to start pointing some of our people who are interested in this issue to VPI, because we kind of align ideologically very much the same. In Idaho has been really interesting this week. Just on Tuesday, a ballot initiative for top 4 in instant runoff voting was filed. And then also earlier in the legislative period, they had passed a law that said no ranked choice voting, and the ballot initiative would repeal that law. And I actually think this is really great, because earlier in the legislative session, our Idaho chapter, who spent a lot of time really looking at what was put out, came across a piece of legislation that wanted to try to weaken the ability of citizens to have a ballot initiative. And they fought that. They made a really nice statement against it, and it actually failed. And that it's so important, right? Here's an opportunity for the ballot initiative, and they would have really restricted that opportunity if that had gone through. In Pennsylvania this last week, more legislation to open primaries. they are closed. And so like over 1 million people cannot participate in the primaries in Nevada. The Nevada chapter, last election in Nevada, they had a top 5 RCV on the ballot and it passed. And in order for it to become law, it has to pass again in 2024. And our Nevada chapter last year had people come and talk to them about RCV so they could better understand. And if they wanted to engage, it was something they felt they wanted to engage with, they could. Utah has its pilot program. Georgia has something out. Almost every state has something out. And then there are many. So I've talked about kind of RCV on a state and congressional level. And the way primaries work on the presidential level are different. So that map that I showed you, all of that is not the same for presidential primaries. Much more of the states are closed for presidential primaries. So there's been a lot of legislation about ranked choice voting in presidential primaries. So those are kind of the initiatives that we're working on now. They're part of our overall plan. Other things that we'll have going on is we have a couple of women that are working really hard on campaign finance issues, which interfere with all of our elections. And they're going to be putting out a meme series so we can educate on that a little bit more if there's areas you want to get involved in. And we'll have just more education about how you vote and where you vote in primaries and when to register. But you know, that's kind of where we are, and we're always looking for more volunteers, and any way that we can help you in advocating for issues that you're interested in, we're here to do that.
Jessica, do you want to talk about these?
Oh, sure.
As you're just as like organizations.
These are some organizations that we find to be nonpartisan. Particularly Unite America is one of our great partners. They put out a lot of information. If you want to find out more information about any of the things that I talked about today, Fair Vote, also open primaries, and then our friends at Veterans for Political Innovation. If you want to, if there's anything more, those are some really great resources to look into these issues.
And I will put a link to all of those different things in the chat. When I post the details of the video, we can put those there. One of the other things I was thinking about as we were talking about it, you know, MWEG talks a lot about being a principled voter. And I think the way the current system is set up, or a principled voter, did I say that? A principled citizen. And it's really tricky when you are voting based on initiatives or different things that you want to see changed, and they're split between party or candidates, or however that goes. So here in Arizona, you mentioned how it's somewhat of an open primary, so you have to be a registered primary or registered to a party in order to vote in those primaries, and that makes it kind of tricky because you can't really vote split ticket, right? That's how it kind of limits you on that, because you can't vote for candidates on different matters that you want. So I'm really interested to learn more about ranked choice voting and see how that goes. And I will be at the May 11th event for the Arizona chapter. So I would invite anybody from Arizona to, if you are not a chapter member, to join us for that, and to log into MWEG and find your chapter if there is one in your area, or link up, find some information so that you can be part of some of these special educational events that we have planned, that Jessica has planned with her group. Also, if you have questions, you can put them in the chat on the Facebook discussion page. If you want to find and learn some more about principled citizen or voting, some of those different things, we have past Grow videos that are posted in our YouTube playlist that are open for anybody. You can go to the MWEG YouTube page and see some of those past videos to learn a little bit more about that as well. So we welcome you guys to do that and to get educated on it so that you can make a decision. Jessica, thank you so much for being part of our Grow today. And thank you for being at MWEG and taking on our Protecting Democracy team and working with all those women to, you know, work on ranked choice voting and all the other exciting protecting democracy issues. They're exciting to us, right? But it's great to learn. So thank you for being here. And we look forward to you joining us next week for our grow. So keep an eye out for we have Emma Petty Adams and Julia Roig, who is going to be with us. And that'll be great. So we look forward to seeing you guys next week. Have a good day.